Okay, YouTube tells me I can go beyond 15 minutes in uploading my video, so I'm going to test that by making this the last segment in the what am I calling it? Reasoning Out Atheism videos. Okay, I did 8 of them. I showed the first 2 in video format, and then the rest of the series through 8 is in links, audio links in the video description, and this is the video to close it. And I think I'm going to try and close it with a bang. What did we learn? I mean, I was learning as I was talking, so hopefully you learned as you heard it. We learned that there is a way to come up with a non-God construct of how the universe got here. It's got some problems, but it's a little more plausible than the ideas being bandied about now. And basically the construct, which was kind of how Symbolic did it, really, he came up with the idea that instead of positing a God that was always there, posit some laws that were always there. And the universe came out of these laws. Now that's a superior idea to the typical evolutionary construct, because if there are laws that caused everything, then all the permutations of life as we know it would be housed in those laws. And that really matters to say, because genes, G-E-N-E-S, are really instruction sets. They're like little building instructions about how to make an organism. And the problem with evolution is that it posits lower life forms begetting higher life forms. Okay, and that can't happen because the genes to make the higher life forms have to be present in the parents in order for the higher life forms to exist. By contrast, if you had a set of laws that just always existed, then any kind of organism would be a subset production, subset child of those laws. And so it doesn't matter that some organisms don't have certain genes and other organisms do. Okay, so the parent would be a set of laws. And the other good thing about this idea is that math, the very structure of math, reflects the way nature operates. Either reflects or causes or is the manifestation of these laws. Take your pick. For example, the whole structure of genetics is really set theory in math. Okay? The genes that are in an organism, that's a set of attributes. And all attributes of all organisms coming through those genes can mutate, but that's like fractals, which is another math concept. Fractals set a limit. The limit is the set. And all the attributes come from the set. Okay? So there you have it. Set theory and fractals illustrate genetics. And maybe they actually are the laws of genetics, because they act the same way. Alright? So either math is the manifestation of these laws that Symbolic posited started the universe, or it is the actual laws themselves that we see operating with in math, language, so to speak. I mean, everything really boils down to a kind of math, no matter what you're talking about. That would be a non-God cause for the universe. And then you can, vary it from there. Big Bang, steady state, multi-universe, you name it. Okay, and of course steady state and multi-universe are also math concepts, because infinity really mathematically is a stasis. It is not an infinite progression. Only finity can progress or regress. Okay, adding to, adding to, adding to, that's a finite thing. It just keeps on going. And then of course you have space-time, which is essentially everybody is in one set place. In other words, there's a set called the universe, and all of us are in it, inside that set. So we are the members of the set, and we're moving along on in the universe, and we call that movement time. but we're really always in the same place. In other words, where you're standing today, something or someone else was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 3,000 years ago. The place has not, has changed topographically, but the place still exists and has existed for who knows how many billions of years. You just happen to occupy that space now. All right? Whatever occupied that space a billion years ago has moved on and calls that time. So see how these are all math concepts, but they display themselves in physics, in biology, in anything you want to name. Okay? Your thought is linear. Well, that's a math concept. Okay? Sometimes your thought is curvilinear. Well, that's a math concept. And in quantum mechanics, of course, is obviously a math concept, but we see it play. All right, the very way atoms play inside themselves is indicative of mass being the differential that you have to measure in order to go from quantum mechanics to relativity, theory of relativity, the general relativity that Einstein came up with. Okay, that's the difference. It's a matter of mass. The smaller the mass, the more you're going toward the quantum mechanics principles. The higher the mass, the more you're going toward general relativity. And that's the litmus there, is how much mass. Okay, and it operates at an opposite end in quantum mechanics versus general relativity. And of course then you got string theory. Right, but all of those things are processes which are derivative of some set of initial laws. And we see all of those laws in math. So if you wanted some kind of objective way to establish whether or not God exists, math is it, baby. But that leads to then two problems, and that's what I was covering in the episodes ROA 5 through 8. Is we have a kind of reverse evolution going on here, where the laws start the ball rolling, and they have all the attributes, and they have all the instructions, and therefore everything is really essentially a hybridization of the laws. So it's not really evolution, it's technically a hybridization extended over a long period of time. And therefore you had initial populations, in the universe here on Earth, of many variegated life forms. Okay? And therefore they all mutated from themselves. So man would have always been here, not always, but there was some start point, and man never came from an ape, but man was always man. A fly is always a fly, an alligator is always an alligator. Okay? There are kinds of beings, and they mutate within their kinds, but because the genetic instruction set isn't big enough per being, they only mutate within their kinds, and that's how the variety is here. And there are many evolutionary theories out there which are not Darwinian in nature that posit beginning populations like this. I don't know what they call themselves. I don't know what that brand of evolution is called. But strictly speaking, it's not evolution, it's hybridization. Okay, classic hybridization writ large. But it's still plausible as a non-God concept, authored by laws. Okay, fine. But then you have the problem of these laws would have to be alive. Okay, but living, is it living like a plant, which is non-conscious? Or is it living like an animal or human, which is conscious? Alright, you have to solve that, and you're going to have to conclude that these laws are alive in some manner. Is it a life force, like the Buddhists, pretty much come up with? Because they got bodhisattvas now, but I don't want to get into that. That's a Mahayana Buddhism, which is the current brand today, the most common brand today. But, are we talking about a life force that is not conscious or, personal? Because if it's conscious, it's personal. Or are we talking about a life that's personal, that being conscious, it would have to be personal? And you have to kind of argue toward life force being conscious and personal, because we are. See, we're the children of something. Humanity is the child of something. And whatever attributes we got from some parent that had those attributes. And our attributes would be smaller than the parent. Okay? And that's something that we know of through the law of entropy, is that if you make a copy on a copier, the first copy is the best, but by the time you've made the 50th copy of a 50th copy, it's degraded. So every child is less than the parent. And that's due to entropy. In other words, the genes break down after so many times that they copy. Alright? Every time the genes, copy themselves, the copy is a little more inferior to the previous copy. And we've seen that in the human race. 1,000 years ago we were stronger, we were smarter, we could take more hardship, we had more integrity. Okay, we were also more brutal. But I submit to you that our lessening brutality is a symptom of our becoming weaker as beings than we were 1,000 years ago. Okay? And we have a higher need for technology because of that weakness. And we've developed the technology, that's true. But we're not better than the past. Our abilities are not better than the past. It was very common 1,000 years ago for people to speak several languages. They could memorize prodigious amounts of material. They didn't have to write things down because they could remember it. And life was harder then too because they didn't have the technology, but they also didn't need it. So man really hasn't improved over the millennia. Okay? Every society that went down in the past went down because it became too refined. I don't care where you want to look. You want to look at Persia, you want to look at Greece, you want to look at Rome, you want to look at Egypt. They all failed because they became too refined. The soft life, which we all live, except for the people in the third world countries who are just starting to live the soft life, or trying to get there. Okay? So man is degrading. There's no doubt about that. We don't live as long, we can't run as fast, we can't do as much. We can't think as well. We're always looking backwards at the high philosophers, at the big classical philosophers like Socrates and Plato and all that. We're looking backwards. We don't have any new philosophers that have outdone those guys. That's a symptom of our becoming weaker as a species, as a being. Okay, but then the flip side is, well, if we're hybridization and we can think and we're persons and there are these laws that begot us, mindlessly or not, conscious, yes, but maybe mindless, like the deists conceive of God. Okay, well, but then if the parent is bigger, then what about life after death? And I covered that also in Reasoning Out Atheism, is that it argues that there is life after death, and that you are actually of two kinds of natures. Your body is biological, but the fact that you can conceive of immaterial things and work with abstract thought, which if you are begotten by immaterial laws of some kind of life force, then you have a nature that's immaterial also that will go on living, because the laws do. Okay, now what does that mean? What is life after death? Notice how we're still not talking about a God question. Okay? We don't have to be talking about a God question. It's just plain logical that you go on living after this body dies, because you were begotten by something immaterial, at least a set of laws. Okay, and those laws had to always exist. And technically speaking, for you to be a person and to have a mind and a consciousness, then those laws are embedded in some kind of consciousness, some kind of life. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the life is some kind of judgmental thing. It could just be a parent that begets. Alright? It could even be mindlessly begotten. It just keeps on laying eggs, so to speak, as a natural part of that being's being. All right, we haven't gotten into the character of the ultimate parent. We've only gotten to the point where, well, there has to be some kind of parent that's immaterial, operating like laws, conscious and alive, otherwise we couldn't be conscious and alive, but not necessarily planning it. Okay? Not necessarily involved with what it begets. And the deists will tell you that their idea of God is that God just sets the ball rolling and begets, but then doesn't get involved with the creation. Leaves the creation go wherever it will. Okay, well maybe that's an idea to play with. Okay? So that's where we kind of ended up. And then the criterion for judging whether or not it's just a mindless set of laws, because laws don't have any mass or energy. Math has no mass or energy. But clearly, everything follows math principles in the universe. So the question is going to be whether or not these laws really are encased, as it were, in a mind, therefore person. Whether or not that person chooses to be involved with what that person or persons begets. And of course that's the next question. Are we talking about a group of persons similar to the Greek mythological ideas, which every culture on the planet has had? Some kind of pantheon where, these begetters each did part of it. Is there any plausibility to that? Okay. And that would bespeak a certain limited involvement with the begotten. All right? Or are we talking about a completely mindless, kind of like computer ruling, where these laws are just the math principles or symptomized by the math principles, and they just play and play and play and play and play? And therefore what passes for mindedness in us and passes for personhood in us is really just the programming. And a whole lot of people will tell you that that's what it is. A whole lot of atheists, for example, will exclaim that. Well, okay, that's an argument too to make. You see how it doesn't require evolution. And to say that it's not evolution doesn't require saying that it's God that did it. If you say evolution is right, then the Christian can turn around and say, well, God created evolution. You don't have an answer. So evolution doesn't prove anything about God, pro or con. By the same token, you can take evolution away, and you still haven't proven God exists or not. Because here's the alternative explanation. These laws did it. And then it's a question, well, are the laws minded or not? Are the laws encased in a person who thinks or not? And then is that person involved with creation or not? You have all those questions to answer. And there are a variety of religions in the world which go in both directions. Okay, and as far as I'm concerned, none of them have, sufficient accounting. None of the religions of the world have sufficient accounting, not even the Christian one. Of course, my answer is that God has nothing to do with Christianity, even though the God of the Bible is really the God. Okay? But I don't want to get too far afield in that, and I don't want to address the question of whether the Bible is right here. Because we're just talking about reasoning out atheism. And we're coming up with an atheistic set of explanations. Okay? That isn't even necessarily atheistic so much as it is not Christian. Because you got Buddhism, you got animism, you got the whole Greek pantheon, similar types of concepts that every culture has. Lots of demigods, gods and demiurges and all that bit, Gnosticism is another version of it which would fit in here. And you can still call yourself an atheist because it's not really God you're talking about, but super beings that just happen to be there. Alright? Now, the flip side of this is that or the most important part about this is that if you have a system where it's minded or not minded, well, no, let's go back. If you have a system where it's not minded, where it's just a bunch of laws acting like computer programs, and then we're all sort of products of those computer programs, those laws, which we see math represent, then the conundrum you're faced with, assuming that you can solve the mindedness problem, why are you a person, why do you have a mind, why do you have consciousness, you are still left with the last big hurdle as an atheist of where's their justice. And the ultimate conclusion you have to draw is that there isn't any. Okay? As long as you are created by a mindless set of forces, even if you call them life, there is no justice. In other words, whatever happens to you happens, whatever you do, you do. And kind of like physics, there are consequences so long as you're alive, but once you're dead, that's it, forget it. So anything that happened to you wrong when you were down here, when you were alive down here, and assuming that you die and that's it, or even if you assume an afterlife, there's no justice mechanism, because it's just a bunch of mindless laws. Okay, so now let's flip that and say, well, if there's life after death, then you have some kind of justice mechanism potential. Because presumably in your next life, you know something about this life, and so does everybody else who you interacted with, and you'll all be interacting again on a different plane of existence. So then you're talking about some kind of justice mechanism there. On top of that, if there are super beings who collectively or interactively helped create some part of the universe as we know it, they will or they won't to some extent want to exact some kind of justice because they are impacted by what the other creatures or other beings in the universe have done. Okay, because justice is a societal concept, justice is a corporate concept, justice is a group concept of interaction going on, and how do you adjudicate the freedoms of each of the beings? That takes a mind to do. A mindless computer program can't do that. A mindless set of laws can't do that. It might have a mechanism that apes that. But if you have a mind and you have thought and you have will, all of what went into the mind and the thought and the will requires another mind and a thought and a will to adjudicate. Laws can't do that because laws that are mindless can't adjust to the qualitative factors in will. Okay, if I will to have chocolate pie because I hate lemon meringue pie, does that require adjudication? A computer program wouldn't know that it's irrelevant. It's just a matter of taste. Okay, but another mind would know. Is it a sin to hate lemon meringue pie? Well, a computer program isn't going to even know what lemon meringue pie tastes like, so couldn't rule on it. And then there are other things, that are murder and all those other things, which obviously should require some kind of justice mechanism. That aren't matters of, they might be matters of taste, but they're matters of taste that ought to be ruled against. Somebody wants to murder. Somebody likes murdering. Well, shouldn't that get an adjudication? And of course we all would answer yes. Person should be executed, but executing the person really isn't sufficient punishment for murder. There's got to be, if there's an afterlife especially, there's got to be something that carries over. So if you have a life after this one, and that would mean everybody else does too, and that would mean whatever issues were unresolved in this life carry over to the next, and you would have to know what the issues were in your prior life. Now, reincarnation is sort of man's construct about this, trying to contend a justice mechanism, but unfortunately, in all the reincarnation religions, you don't have a memory of your past life. And a lot of them try to dredge up a system whereby you can find out what your past lives are, and you're deemed some kind of great spiritual person if you can dip into and finally know what your past lives are, which is a big crock. Okay? If there was a real justice mechanism involved in reincarnating, then you would have to know from the get-go what your prior life was. Otherwise, there's no way to adjudicate it by you or by anybody else. So, but still, there would be some version of reincarnation maybe, or some other kind of life where people all go to the same place and they're in a different bodily form, but they have a consciousness. And then they keep on resolving and keep on resolving and going through and going through and going through. I submit to you that that's a pretty hellish idea, but it's a very common idea in the universe. People have that. A lot of people believe in this. Okay. So you do have some kind of limited justice mechanism in that case. All right, but everybody's dealing with partial knowledge then. And that means that the mistakes, because a lot of injustice is due to mistakes. And people don't get up in the morning, generally speaking, and say, gee, I'd like to hurt somebody today. Okay, what happens is most injustices in life are really done by people who mean well, and they're done by mistakes. Nobody gets up in the morning and decides that he wants to anodize a screw so badly that it's going to break off in an aircraft in flight and therefore blow up the airplane. See, an airplane can blow up simply because the screws don't have the proper anodization. Okay, anodization is what helps keep the screw onto the fuselage so that the metal plates of the plane will stay together while you're up in the air. All right? Nobody gets up in the morning and says, gee, I'd like to make a plane blow apart today. Except the terrorists, and they're already crazy, and they all ought to be dead. All right? People don't normally get up in the morning and decide that they want to harm somebody. They don't get up in the morning and decide to be bad. All right? That's not the normal human thing. We like getting along with each other. We like being nice to each other. We like having a nice time. Okay, so mistakes, when you have mistakes or go crazy, that's when injustices occur. Okay, so if everybody's got partial knowledge in this life and the next life and the next life and the next life, and if you're finite, you have partial knowledge, then there are going to be continued injustices forever. Nothing ever really gets adjudicated, finally. It's always gradual. It's always partial. That's pretty unsatisfying. So that's when you have to start saying, okay, well, isn't there something bigger than some collection of super beings or some afterlife without super beings that just you graduate from this bodily form and go to another one, but you're still stuck with partial knowledge? Where's the adjudication that really resolves it? And of course, you can always argue, well, there just isn't one. Okay, well, then there isn't justice. There's a semblance of justice. There's an adjustment mechanism that's partial in this life, partial in the next life, partial in the next life. It's always partial, and it's always subjective, and it's always, there are always going to be mistakes. That's pretty unsatisfying. It'd be better never to be born. So that's what gets people thinking, well, gee, maybe there really is a God. And the definition of God in this case is completely all-knowing, completely unconstrained, completely righteous, completely able to adjudicate everything, and completely desirous of doing so, completely loving. Because love means love of justice first. Love means love of the truth first. Love of the truth being free, and therefore love of justice. Because if there's no truth, there's no justice. If truth isn't free, it's not worth being true. And therefore there would be no justice either. So it's love of truth being free that promotes and projects justice. Therefore, righteousness can be obtained. That's why people want God. It isn't so much to avoid death. It's because there's this desire that there be justice somewhere along the line. True, complete justice. Now, we have this idea in us as humans. We want justice. We are constantly thinking in justice terms. From the minute we get up in the morning to the minute we go to sleep. Right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong. Am I good? Is so-and-so good? Is this good? Is this bad? Is this good? Is this bad? It's our constant thought pattern. And we're incorrect in a lot of our decisions about what's right and what's wrong. But we're constantly thinking that way. And we're constantly looking for justice. And we're constantly evaluating whether a thing is just or justified. Now, where do we get those thoughts? Why are we making those demands if they can't be fulfilled? If we're set up by laws, then that argues that there's a lawgiver. Again, it's not, I'm not trying to say which version of God. All right, because there are a lot of different ideas about God out there. But it argues that there's got to be something beyond human. There's got to be a life after death, because immateriality is bigger than materiality. Animacy is bigger than inanimacy. It didn't get here just from nothing. Something always comes from something. And if the initial process, the initial progenitor are laws, they would have to be alive laws with some kind of mind in order for justice to exist. And then the question is, okay, is it one mind or many? And is it partial justice or total? And those are the kinds of parameters that you have to work out.